Hello, and welcome to Not Again with Sandy. This is a different title than I announced last time, and let me explain. I had not done the research I should have done when I introduced my channel that way. I thought that was going to be the name of this channel, but I realized that while it's not heavily used on YouTube, it is heavily used on Ravelry. So I want to respect that that is someone's property, that someone has invested time and energy into that. And I renamed my channel to be Not Again, KNOT, with Sandy. So let's first check in with my LiRi Tee. I have been able to separate for the sleeves, which I always love this section. It starts looking more like what you're making and less like just an amorphous bunch of yarn. Still really enjoying the fabric this is making. I'm still on my first skein. This is all I have left of the first skein. So I think it's going to easily be as long as I want it to be. I always tend to make things a little longer. I came up with a solution for one of the problems I talked about last time, and I have another problem that I don't have a solution for, so I'm open to suggestions. So remember last time I was confusing a set of rounds, a set of rows with what she was asking for in the pattern, which she was actually listing it by row, how many rows, both wrong side and right side, because this was before I joined in the middle. And I was interpreting it as rounds. And so at one point I did 20 rounds when I only need to do 10, and I completely overshot my stitch count. What I started doing is listing out all of the rounds in advance, as I do with listing the rows here and then the stitch count that each section has here. And what that did for me is I quite easily saw when I reached the stitch count that had previously been hidden under my sticky note, but I made a point of looking this time. And I could see that those number of rows matched the number of rows that she indicated were needed. So that seemed to fix that. My other problem, though, was that in order to create this little edge here on my V-neck, the knit rows had the first 3 stitches of purl, and the purl rows had the first 3 stitches be knit. And for some reason, on those wrong side rows, I would start knitting and I would just keep going. I'm off to the races, knitting along. Luckily, I noticed generally before I got too far, I would look at my knitting and go, okay, yeah, this isn't right, and I would have to knit it back. But I never got too far, and that was a blessing, so I didn't have to rip out everything. But I didn't come up with a solution for that. I don't know, maybe a special stitch counter, stitch marker would help with that. I don't know. Let me know your thoughts on that. What would have worked well to remind me that this is the point where I stop knitting and start purling. Okay, so I'm feeling good about my LiRi Tee. I'm looking forward to moving on with that. So let's talk about the main topic today. The main topic is my first successful sweater, and I am very proud of this sweater, but that doesn't mean that it was all smooth as I was knitting it. Quite the contrary. So what I knitted was a Larch sweater. That's the title of it, L-A-R-C-H, and it came from this book, Plain and Simple by Pam Allen. It's a really nice book of very cozy, warm sweaters. And I enjoyed very much the directions for the Larch sweater. It's the only sweater I've made from the book, but I thought it was very easy to follow and perfect for someone who perhaps was not very confident yet in their garment knitting. The only change I made was I did not put in the pockets that is included in the pattern, and that's simply because I didn't feel more as accomplished as I needed to be to try pockets. If I were to make it now, I might try to, but I really like the smooth line without the pockets, so I don't know. I might make it just as I did. So the Larch sweater is a bottom-up sweater. just a long tunic style. And when you separate for the arms, then it becomes the front and the back are worked flat and then joined with a 3-needle bind off. And at that point, you're supposed to lay it down and measure it and do a little steam block to make sure it's the right size. I said that backwards. You should steam block first and then measure it. Forgive me. So the problems I had with this sweater fell into 2 different areas, and I think I'll just address them separately so that it'll be very clear what I'm talking about in each case. The first problem was with the dyeing of it. And for most of us, we don't dye sweaters, but another YouTube person that I was following that pandemic summer was showing people how easy it is to dye. And when you're talking animal fibers, such as wool, yak, alpaca, silk, those can be dyed with just food coloring, vinegar, and hot water. And it's just like alchemy. You prepare your dye bath with the dye, the vinegar, and the hot water. Put your yarn in, make sure it's agitated enough so it has access to all the dye that's in the dye bath. And after a period of time, you take it out and your yarn is a different color and the dye bath is clear. It's like magic. So I had a lot of fun experimenting with that. And when I could not find enough worsted weight yarn in my stash, I thought, this is a great opportunity. So I ordered some Bear Knit Picks Wool of the Andes yarn. And Knit Picks sells, I think, most of their bases in a bare state, meaning no dye at all. And it was really fun to figure out what I wanted to do. I decided on a medium gray base that in the next stage of my dyeing, I would put in a catering pan on top of the stove and just speckle with purple and teal. And that's what I did. And it worked out, I thought, beautifully. I was really excited to start knitting. But after I had knitted the tunic and I'd done the 3-needle bind off, I'd laid it out, done my steam blocking, and started measuring it. Boy, I didn't even have to measure. I could just look at it and I could see that I had a problem here. The bottom half of my tunic was much lighter than the top half. It was clearly totally different tones of gray. And I had to think about that for a bit. But what I think happened is I had used an acid dye powder for the dyeing. And acid dye powders are thick. You have to introduce the water slowly so it becomes sort of a paste, and then continue adding water and mixing and working with it. And it takes some time for the dye to really dissolve into the water and fully integrate evenly. And I think that was my problem. I think that enough of the dye kind of precipitated to the bottom that as I was pouring out the dye, the measurement of dye for my dye bath, the first parts were less saturated with gray, and each bath slowly grew darker and darker. When I ripped apart my sweater, because I could not see any other way I could fix this, and really looked at my yarn, I could see that I had colors ranging all the way from a light dove gray to a medium charcoal gray. And if you can believe it, that was the first time I had really looked at all my yarn gathered together. It's hard to believe now. So I had to rip it all out and knit it again, really making that effort to take a dark skein and a light skein, do the helical knitting, which I had used the first time, but when you don't have high contrast between your grays, it doesn't turn out. And I mean, obviously, as I was going along, my grays were getting darker and darker, and that just became very clear. But it was so gradual as I was knitting, I didn't notice it. So that was the dyeing part, and I do have a solution, but let's talk now about the knitting part. Knit Picks Wool of the Andes is a lovely yarn, but I think of it, and maybe it's just me, as sort of a lighter worsted. It's not thick and meaty like I kind of like my worsted to be, and maybe what I'm actually preferring is more of a Aran weight. I don't know. I was doing my gauge swatch, and this was my first time ever doing a gauge swatch. I was one of those people who thought, well, I bought the needles, I bought the right yarn, I'm going to knit it and it'll be fine because I'm doing exactly what the designer did. I had no idea at that time that knitters could vary so greatly between themselves into how, just with the tension they used. I know a person that has to have a needle 2 sizes different in her left hand than her right hand just to have the same gauge because of the yarn is held so differently from one side to the other. I didn't realize that. So, but now I did. After my pandemic summer of watching podcasts, I was doing my very first gauge swatches. But in order to reach the gauge, and I think this was partly because of the lighter type of worsted that this was, the fabric was really light. I just wasn't enjoying the fabric. And the podcasters all agreed, you can shift this through math by figuring out how many stitches you need to get the fabric that you like. So I ended up using a needle, I think like 2 sizes different than the pattern called for, and this was the fabric I liked. And then I needed to calculate how many stitches I needed. It would actually be like knitting a larger size, but because I was using a smaller needle and a kind of smaller weight yarn, it should turn out roughly the same. It was sort of a proportion problem. So I did those calculations. I did all the measurements of the gauges that I had to have to match the 4 inches with the needle size they gave versus the fabric that I liked gauge. Really tickled about it. But the other thing I noticed when I steam blocked and measured, this sweater was nowhere near as wide as it was supposed to be. The bust measurement was much thinner. I tried it on and it was not wide and drapey like I wanted this tunic sweater to be. It was just kind of tight. It had maybe 3 or 4 inches of positive ease. So it fit like a normal sweater and not this roomy tunic that I was looking for. What had I done? Well, I had used the needle size that I wanted for the right fabric, but I had not cast on that larger size. I had cast on the size for my bust measurement, which still had, I think, 9 inches of positive ease, but by sizing down the needles, that rapidly fell down to just a slightly bigger sweater than any other normal sweater might be. That was very disappointing. But luckily, after some thinking about it, and of course, as I'm ripping out the sweater to fix the gray problem and the size problem, I hit upon a potential solution. And I ran this by one of the very knowledgeable ladies at my local yarn store. I told her the problem and I said, this is what I'm wondering. If I were to find a medium gray color lace weight that I could hold with this worsted weight, maybe it would fix both my problems. It would bulk up the yarn so that I would get the larger size I'm looking for, and it would kind of mediate those highs and lows tones of the gray in my sweater. And they had a beautiful, beautiful medium gray lace weight yarn that was exactly the tone of gray that I had dyed. So I think I bought 3 skeins of them, but I barely used 2. I think it was just like 1.5. Those lace weight yarns go forever. And it worked perfectly. The lace weight held with the worsted, bulked it up enough that knitting the size I was knitting gave me the drape and the fullness that I wanted, the tunic looseness that I was looking for. And that medium gray really helped blend the highs and the lows of gray that I have between the dove gray and the charcoal gray. And in the end, it turned out perfectly. just the way I wanted it. Now, it wasn't smooth getting there, but I felt proud of a sweater for the first time in a long time. Let's talk again soon.